Lucas Phillips, welcome to Acquiring Minds.
Thank you for having me, Will. I'm very excited to be here. I've been an avid listener for years, so it's cool being here right now.
Well, I love to hear that. I love having former listeners, successful entrepreneurs, now as guests. It's so much fun. And in your case, Lucas, you bought an unusual, interesting business, replacement carpeting and rubber mats for vintage cars. We're going to hear all about it. It's going strong now. It wasn't always. So this is a story of both success and peril. So much ground to cover with you, Lucas. Please start us off explaining why it was you chose to buy a business in the first place.
So I bought my company. I decided to buy to pursue ETA when I was 23 years old. And I was coming off of a 5-year journey building a startup with traditional equity financing, venture-backed financing while I was in college at Northwestern, and then for a few years following college. And I had learned so much from that experience. And one thing that and just in terms of operating a company and working with a team, as a young person, that was the extent of my professional experience. And so when I left that business to pursue something else, and I left because I was really just ready to do something new, and there was a team in place running that thing properly at that point. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur and continue to pursue entrepreneurship. And I figured I could either start something new and bootstrap it and build it very slowly, or I could start something new and raise outside capital like I had done. And neither of those appealed to me because I didn't enjoy the practice of needing to constantly raise more equity financing for some rocket ship outcome that is very improbable. I didn't want to bootstrap something very slowly. And so a friend of mine who had gone to Kellogg introduced me to the ETA idea. And I read Buy Then Build, and I was living in Austin, Texas at the time. And then I joined the acquisition lab, and I moved back to New York City, where my family is, to be closer to my father, who's a small business owner himself, and has actually done the ETA thing himself. He bought his company in 1997 before it was even ETA, and start my search in a location that I would want to be planted for those decades of business ownership.
Lucas, let me jump in with a couple follow-ups. Your startup, tech?
It was a coffee business, a retail brick and mortar coffee business. And we started this business. It was called Brew Bike on Northwestern's campus. It was a student-run coffee business. And then we expanded to many other campuses with this student-run model, brick and mortar coffee shops, students learning to be entrepreneurs on college campuses running their own businesses. And with that, we would have a brand that differentiates us from the Starbuckses and the Dunkins of the world, this homegrown brand on college campuses. So I
love that concept. Yeah. And would you consider that a success?
I started the business when I was 18, and I had so much fun running it with the money that I'd gotten from my bar mitzvah and some credit card debt when I owned 100% of the company. Mm-hmm. And then I teamed up with a Booth MBA, and we expanded the business to many more schools with capital from angel investors and family offices. And I didn't enjoy it as much doing that. And eventually...
Because you had investors to answer to, or was there something else about it you didn't like?
It was the growth expectations that we had to meet in order to have a successful outcome.
Yeah.
And I didn't see that path for this business, but my business partner at the time really did. And so I helped support the company for a number of additional years after we transitioned from that small business at Northwestern that Lucas is running to expanding to more campuses, right? I assisted operationally, I assisted with the fundraising, and then it had gotten to a point during COVID where I had helped position the business to get through COVID and continue to expand after COVID. And at that point, I was ready to do something else.
And given that also that it wasn't tech, we hear startup, we think tech, and tech is, founder in his laptop or her laptop coding often, if they're technical, not always. In this case, this started as more of, you started by saying this was brick and mortar. Where I'm going with this is, while it was a quote startup with outside growth capital involved, it gave you a taste of small business as we understand it. Did it not? Brick and mortar small business.
Yes, it absolutely did. And I come from generations of small business owners, like Jewish, Ellis Island immigrants who came to New York and couldn't get a job somewhere. And so they started a business. And that was my great grandpa. That was my grandpa. That's my dad. And so the comfort that I have, or the eagerness to be in a small business, I think comes from that as much as my experience with Brewbike.
And say more about your dad, seeing your dad, that direct exposure to small business, and what you liked or didn't or whatever, why that has served as an influence.
Well, when I think about the reasons why I chose to pursue this path, even when I got to college and started the coffee business and have decided to continue on some sort of entrepreneurial path after, I think my role model in a lot of this has been my dad. And when I've dug into why that's the case, I grew up in Manhattan in this very high pressure, high power, high wealth environment. And I was one of the few students whose dad was able to drop him off at school in the morning or take me to hockey or tennis practice. And that was because he was a small business owner and had control of his time and wasn't working at an investment bank or in consulting or corporate attorney of some sort. And we were able to have a lifestyle that was wonderful. I was able to attend a private school and go to a private college, and we had a second home to go to in the summers. It wasn't, and some of the students I was in class with were like, being dropped off at school with a driver and we're flying around on private planes. Like, that wasn't at all my upbringing, but it was very comfortable and in a very high cost of living place like New York City.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so going to school, I saw all my friends and a lot of other people being interested in getting on this, treadmill towards corporate America. And I was very cautious to do that because I knew I wanted the freedom that business ownership would afford me. And that was back of mind in the beginning, right? It was just kind of like a gut instinct that I had from my upbringing. And then over time, I have done, self-exploration and figured out that that's really the motivator.
In our pre-call, Lucas, we talked about the framing of do you want to be king or do you want to be rich? I love this framework. You actually volunteered it to overlay on your thoughts here, and so I'll just share it and you respond. Your high school experience was a perfect encapsulation of that, because while you were exposed to very wealthy families, private jets being dropped off in the Escalade, whatever, their fathers, we presume, were also the epitome of golden handcuffs, had no freedom, didn't see their kids, etc., but were probably multiples wealthier than your family, frankly. To have a private jet. So they were rich, but your dad was king because he had all the freedom that you just described. And so that's something that you have chosen for yourself. And so it's such a good framing, and it's something that the audience should always be thinking about themselves. And I think there's a lot of self-selection of wanting to be king types in this world, because you can make $1 million a year in corporate or more, for a lot of the people who choose to buy businesses. And so you can have a net worth that is perhaps comparable, maybe even more, not everybody, but maybe even more, and less risk. Arguably, you could always be fired. So you do have customer concentration of 1 when you're an employee, but let's just, for the sake of argument, say less risk, but less freedom. And so business ownership is, I think it's freedom. I mean, it's what we hear about entrepreneurship all the time. That's the word, freedom. Anyway, anything more to add to that? It's such a great philosophical area to explore.
The only thing to add is that rich versus king outcome is all about the Founder's Dilemma is a book, and that entire book is about the rich versus king outcome. And it's not, it's definitely more of a book that's read in the tech world, but it's also, I think, very applicable to the search world as searchers are considering doing a funded search, right? Which is maybe a bit more of the rich outcome.
Yep.
Or a self-funded search, which is that king outcome. And I recommend that book. It goes into a lot more detail on that philosophical dilemma.
Oh, I did not know. I've never read the book and didn't know it was about that. Great recommendation. Super, Lucas. Great context. Okay, so back to, and we should just say too, that you're also just emphasize that what you already said, your father had an amazing outcome. He's able to live in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, which by itself is an amazing outcome, but also put you in private school, have a second home. I mean, that is wealthy by any normal standard. Maybe
it totally not is. And I have experienced the trials and tribulations of being a small business owner as being the child of someone who is a small business owner, in the furniture industry, and who had completed an acquisition in like 06 or 07, right before the financial crisis, and then demand went, collapsed. And, selling our apartment, selling our second home, moving to a smaller apartment, renting for a few years. And now they're back to where they were. And I think that his business is even stronger. And again, that whole time, it wasn't like I was pulled out of my school or there was any true discomfort.
Yeah.
I can't say that I had real true hardship. I can just say that I experienced the stress that he had.
Yeah.
And
the reality of setbacks. The
Correct.
Reality of setbacks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I was familiar with that.
So let's back up to the present. You have explained why you choose to buy a business, that you join the lab, Walker and Chelsea Wood's acquisition lab, which of course is how we met as well. Take us from there. What was did you develop a thesis? What did your search look like?
I knew I wanted a physical product business, not a services business. And that was just because I grew up with being around my dad's business, furniture business. I had a coffee business, and I like having something tangible and physical. That was really it when I went into the lab, and I was very open-minded. And Chelsea and what the lab does, I think the most valuable part is help searchers figure out what they're looking for by developing a target statement. So when I went through the lab, everyone fell in love for a period of time with the whole 4-hour work week e-commerce quiet light deal.
Yep.
And
I remember.
I was one of those too. I had a period of that. Multiples were really high. The Amazon aggregators were doing their thing.
It was COVID.
It was a different time
e-commerce
than it is
was
now.
Just booming.
Exactly. And so I figured I'm in my early 20s and I'm not really interested in buying something and not that I don't need to spend a lot of time on. But there's all this interest out there in these e-commerce businesses. And I'm sure there's companies out there that could be turned into an e-commerce business, right? Like an e-commerce-ized business.
Say more. Like what?
Yeah, what I was specifically looking for was, and I figured, okay, there's probably companies out there with a physical product that is being distributed, B2B. That physical product is somehow differentiated. It's not just a commodity good. And that company that's distributing the good is selling it, B2B, lower margins than they would realize if they sold direct to consumer. And that company probably has some sort of story that can be told and a brand that's built around that physical product if they wanted to go direct to consumer. And that would be an interesting way to expand the business using the cash flow that's being generated from the B2B sales.
Yeah.
So that was the thesis that I had and what I was looking for.
I love that thesis, Lucas, and spoiler, you found it. But I will say it's incredibly narrow. So, or it would seem to be narrow. So did you find lead flow? Were you worried about deal flow being but a trickle?
I didn't find it to be super narrow because I wasn't so constrained by size. Right? I knew I wasn't able to buy something, over $800,000 in SDE. My family was going to help me with the down payment. Again, I was in my early 20s. I hadn't accumulated enough cash to do that myself. And my family was very clear that they were not willing to fund me buying a much larger business or help with that. So, so I was looking for something, around $500K in SDE, and I was also willing to look all across the U.S. So with the reason
with the idea you would move or that you would run it remotely, because I thought you said you wanted to be in Manhattan and buy in the tri-state area.
So my assumption was if I find something in some faraway part of the U.S. that's a great opportunity, and it's a physical product business, that means there's probably just a warehouse with warehouse staff.
Yeah, yeah.
And that business can probably be relocated fairly easily within a year or two. And my dad has a large warehouse in Connecticut, and he's got some extra room. So that was one of my angles into this. That's not what ended up happening, but that's it. And I don't think there are a lot of searchers with this thesis. And so the deals with physical products that were not yet it turned into direct-to-consumer e-commerce brands on Shopify weren't getting as much interest from my experience. And so I was able to find a few deals. I looked at a lighting company so long ago now, but I remember I met with the owners of a lighting company in LA. That was one option.
And Lucas, so we understand the thesis clearly.
Yeah.
The criterion is that it's not just can it be just a distribution company, but one that hasn't gone fully online, or does it need to be its own branded product? You see what I'm saying?
I would have looked at a distribution company, but I would have preferred to find something that was maybe designing and importing goods from overseas that were being distributed to retailers without. Yeah. And there's a brand, but that branded story isn't being told properly, or as well as it could be. Maybe there's assembly or light manufacturing involved, right? That was, and it's not the clearest thesis, right? There's like qualities that I'm talking about that are a bit vague, and that was okay. My target statement was that I was looking for a consumer products business with $200,000 to $500,000 in SDE, I believe, $200,000 to $500,000. With the and I needed to phrase with the opportunity to modernize operations and sales in a way that wouldn't offend the owner, thinking essentially calling their business really old school. But that was the gist of the target statement, and I was able to get traction with brokers who would think, that's interesting. I have these few deals that could work for you. So
And do you still think it's a good thesis? You probably don't have your nose to the ground anymore, so it's hard to say. But I haven't, let's use my data set. I haven't talked to anybody else in my 300 plus interviews who's done this. So it probably, those opportunities remain. It's only been a few years. And if anything, e-commerce has gotten less attention, not more in the interim.
Correct. I would agree with the e-commerce getting less attention these days.
Fascinating thesis. What'd you find?
It took me 60 or so days to find the deal that I closed on. And
which was exactly what you were looking for and in your home market. Unbelievable. Was that just dumb luck?
It's luck, but it's also, as I went through the lab and was listening to Walker and Chelsea talk about the experience of searchers, and I listened to all of the videos of former searchers that have been interviewed. They have a whole library. For like a few months, every day when I exercised, I would just listen to a video. And something that kept coming up was searchers would sometimes see a great deal that checked all the boxes in the first few months of their search, but they would pass on it because they just hadn't seen enough deals yet, and they thought there would be something better that they would find later on.
Yeah.
And there were stories of people regretting passing on that deal, and then years would go by. Mm-hmm. They said, they wished that they were in the seat in that business, even if it wasn't perfect and there was hair on it, kind of turning it into their business instead of just being on the sideline waiting for another deal, having to do that work. So I was not trigger shy when I found this business, and I had reached out. I set up a bunch of email automations with my target statement, sending them out to brokers. I don't know if that works as well anymore, but there was a broker in the tri-state area who actually Ben Jasper also bought his business through, a former guest who's become a friend now. And I think there's a number of other searchers who have been on your podcast who have bought through this group called the Benjamin Ross Group. They were excellent.
Rings a bell. I think Ben mentions them in his interview.
Yeah.
And for the audience, Ben Jasper bought the manufacturing business in Jersey, waking up at 3:30 in the morning to go learn how to use this machine that makes plastic bags. And it's an absolute horror story of a transition, but he pulls it off. And it's such a great interview.
Yeah, we have another transition horror story coming, by the way.
Okay, great.
So I found the business, and it's a 120-year-old manufacturing company of replacement carpets and other interior parts for classic cars. And they also distribute a line of rubber mats, which they don't manufacture in-house. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, this could fit the bill. And so I looked at the sim, and that was on like a Thursday. And then on Friday, I had a call with the seller. Business was doing just under $300,000 in SDE. And I didn't even know that much more about it at that point. But I had a call with the seller, who was, a 62-year-old man. His name's Ben. He and I remain good friends to this day. Like, we have lunch every week. He was in my factory building racks this week for us.
Nice.
And Ben, and then the following week on Monday, we did a site tour. And then by Tuesday evening, I was under LOI. Oh, wow. Because it was competitive. And there was apparently somebody else interested. Now, to this day, I don't know if that is true, but again, I wasn't trigger shy, right? Yeah. Like, the deal penciled. It was a little over a 3x multiple. There wasn't a lot of inventory because everything's made to order. When I did the site tour, this is the most old school factory you can possibly imagine. And it seemed like to fit the bill exactly for what I was looking to do.
Well, let me double click on that, Lucas. Yeah. First, what was the model exactly, the business model, and how did it fit your e-commerce-izable criterion?
Perfect. So the business had a catalog of thousands of patterns. And when I say a pattern, I mean a stencil on a hanger of big pieces of paper that are stencils with markings all over of them. And there might be 5 to 10 or even some 30 pieces per pattern on a hanger, hanging on a dry cleaning rack that spins around like one of those laundromat conveyor systems in the back of the factory. And there's thousands of them there. And every single pattern fits a different group of year, make, model, door number, body style cars from the early 1900s all the way up to the early 2000s. And so the manufacturing process was, or the process and really the business model was, we were able to offer these products that on a made-to-order basis to many online retailers of car parts, and they were able to acquire customers, acquire orders, and then send us those orders, and we would drop ship on their behalf under either the Newark Auto brand or private label.
So great. So the business worked via channels. It was not direct to consumer. You had these relationships, these car parts, whatever dealers
Correct.
you called them, and they would sell, and then they would sell it. So you had all these channels. They would send you the order. You would drop ship the order. So you already had the shipping and everything ready to go. You were doing that.
Yeah, they were doing that already in the facility, and it would. I mean, it was done incredibly inefficiently, right? I mean, the patterns, we would receive an order from one of these dealers via email, enter it into a Microsoft Fox Pro system, which is only runs on Windows XP, right? So
I haven't heard Fox Pro for a good decade.
Correct. The order would be printed on a dot matrix printer. That would then be handed to added to a stack of orders on a clipboard, and we would give 15 or 20 of them to the manufacturing workers every day to get started on. And one order would say a certain pattern number on it, and that cutter would then go to the shelf and spin the conveyor system around until that pattern number came up, take the pattern number off, bring it over to the cutting table, pick a roll of fabric, a big, heavy, bulky roll of fabric out from stock of, the fabric that we get, which is similar to what was originally in these cars from a domestic mill. And pick the roll up, put it on the table, spread it out, and then start putting the pattern pieces on the back of the carpet, tracing it with chalk, and then cutting it with hand scissors. Okay. So that's how the fabric was cut. And then it would be marked with letters to indicate to the sewers how to then put the fabric back together with sewing machines. And then it would be packed up. There were a couple other workstations, depending on the product that's being made, but simple stuff. And then it would be packed in a box and shipped out. At that point, the orders would come back into the office, and the office manager would bill the order through Fox Pro, print the invoice out through the dot matrix printer, scan the invoice back into the computer through a scanner, and then email those PDFs to the customers. So super inefficient process, but the process was there, right? Order comes in, send it to the floor, cut the fabric, sew the fabric, ship it out, bill it. And so I figured, okay, if this process is here, we can modernize the process with new machinery. And I knew about that machinery from my dad's business because he's in the furniture world and he manufactures upholstery. So he has these cutting machines that cut fabric according to these patterns that he has.
Would that be a CNC?
Yeah, it's a CNC cutting machine.
CNC cutting, which I know in the context of plastics and metals, but I guess there's CNC for everything. It's fabric. Basically for fabric. Yeah. I get it's for those who are unaware. Anybody in manufacturing will know what it is, but it's basically a modern cutting machine that you program. And right,
exactly, exactly. So I figured, okay, one, we can do that on the floor to make this process more efficient, and then two, we can do all of the cloud ERP, QuickBooks implementations that would make the rest of the process much more efficient. And then once we're really ready to scale up, we can build that Shopify storefront and start, delivering ads to customers who are searching for these items and get more orders in the funnel. That's the very simple idea that I had for how I could grow the business.
This is so cool. So let me follow up here. First of all, your point about there being a process, it's a subtle point I've never thought about, but the fact that there was a pretty well-defined, well-followed process versus just it being a hot mess is great, right? Like you said, because now, the business has discipline, the business has structure, this manufacturing business, so you just need to make it more efficient, as opposed to just everything being disorganized. It sounds like it was a pretty organized place, just inefficient, which seems like a great Venn diagram. Inefficient, but organized. I don't know if
the
reaching
place
there.
Was full of junk, Will, like
No.
full
Okay.
of junk every corner. I mean, the owner was, I would say he had hoarding capabilities, like, capacities. Like there was just so much junk in there. And so it was very disorganized, but there was a process,
Yeah.
right? So it was a mess, but there was a process.
Yeah. Well, this conveyor belt, what a visual. The entire business sitting on that conveyor belt. We're recording on January 15th and we're hearing about California all day long.
Yeah.
You just can't help but think about how vulnerable this business was. All of that's essentially IP, even though we're talking about
Correct.
this being an old dusty manufacturing business. You have intellectual property and it's all hanging in a 15 feet by 15 feet conveyor system. Very vulnerable.
And so you're touching on another thing that I liked about the business, which was there's a moat around these patterns that we have.
Yeah.
That makes it hard for someone else to start a business to compete with me.
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
I have thousands of these patterns. And the majority of my sales are these long tail, right?
Yeah.
Search terms on Google where somebody's looking for, a carpet for a 1950 Packard, which there might have been a few thousand of them made. And just because I have that listed, I'm the one to make that sale.
That's amazing.
And so for somebody else to then develop that product, it makes no sense if they're going to sell 4 of them a year.
It's so good. This is let me come back to that. I was going to say this is like the Chenmark fish tackle business, where it's a monopoly essentially. I mean, your intellectual property makes this something of a monopoly. It's just not interesting enough for somebody to invest to come in to compete with you. So you will forever own this market. Now, maybe I'm overstating it. Maybe you have competitors. Well, you do. We're going to hear about some of the acquisitions. We have so far to go, Lucas. But let me just on your decision that you like this business, $300,000 of SDE in a business that is over a century old suggests that it's a very small market. Obviously, it's a niche market. But even layering on e-com and going direct to consumer, you believed that there was a big enough market to make this worth your time?
I mean, I think how I thought about it was, one, it was clear that this business had shrunk over time. And the prior owner was an amazing operator, but he was not a salesperson. And he was not interested in expanding the business. He was interested in earning $250,000 a year, and that's it. Right? So he ran the business in a very lean way, and if he lost a customer, it was okay. Right? A recurring relationship, it was okay. He was eventually going to retire and sell the business. So there was a point in time where it was a much larger business. That's one. Two, it's actually it's a declining market. So that's another thing that I thought about when I was evaluating the deal. But it's a declining market where I think people will continue to restore these cars. There's both like there's a top-down analysis, right? Like where you're looking at IBIS World reports and thinking about like the MBA approach, which is it's a declining market. There's other aspects. It's not growing, whatever. I'm not that type of entrepreneur as much. I'm more of like a bottom-up guy where I looked at this, I evaluated what it was currently doing, and I thought that I could really expand the business by improving the product line and selling direct to consumer. And by the way, again, another thing that I want to keep going back to in our chat, and I keep going back to when I think about a lot of the decisions that I made about this, is I was 23 at the time, and I'm 4 years into this, and I'm 27. So I think there's a lot of searchers who approach this, ETA process towards, after a corporate career.
Yeah.
But for me, this is like one of hopefully many entrepreneurial experiences I have. And so to me, I was, okay, if I'm in my 20s now, and if I buy this business with, $300,000 of SDE and can get it to a point where it's doing over $500,000 of SDE, and, flip it or hire somebody to run the company, and then do it again, like that would be a great outcome.
Right. By age 29. Exactly.
Exactly. And I still I'm at 29 at that point.
Right. No, it's a huge point. More years are more valuable than dollars, and so you are rich in a way when you're in your early 20s, mid 20s, going down this path versus somebody who's mid career is poor in this way. Great point. Thank you for calling it out, and we probably will come back to it. So, quickly, terms of the acquisition.
I acquired the business for just under $1 million. That included about $70,000 of inventory. Right. One of the things I love about the business is there's no finished goods in stock. It's all just raw materials. So that was just rolls of carpet that I could then just immediately start converting into finished goods. So that was the inventory included, and 90% SBA loan, 6% fixed interest rate for 10 years, which is one of the best decisions I've made since buying this company. Was I paid more to fix that rate in an environment when no one thought rates were going to go up.
Wow.
So I think I paid 3/4 of a point more to fix it. And I just figured there's no way, they can't go down any further. The interest rates were so low that if they can't go down any further, there's only one direction they can go. And I don't know if I would still be in business if I had a variable rate and it went up to 12 or 13%.
Well, good on you. That was certainly a wise move. And the idea of paying a premium to fix the interest rate on an SBA loan, is that common? Do you know? Because we so rarely hear of fixed interest rates.
I don't think it's common.
Did you raise your hand to ask if it was possible, or did your lender offer it to you?
I did. I maybe it was just a conversation that I had with my dad, who deals with traditional commercial lending for his business, which is larger, and has access to that type of capital. Where he was saying, "Is there a way you can fix it because rates are so low right now?" But I don't remember how I got the idea but I did ask. Maybe one of the lenders gave me the option. I was working with a few different lenders, and one of them gave me the option to fix it for 7 years. And then I was like, oh man, that would be an awesome thing to not have to worry about. Can all of you do this? And who can do it for the lowest amount? And so.
Great. Did you use a loan broker?
No. I ended up using the acquisition lab connected me with a number of different brokers, number of different lenders. And I pursued the deal with 3 different lenders, including the broker's suggested lender who was brokering the deal. And I ended up choosing the broker's suggested lender simply because they had the best, they were willing to sell me the money for the cheapest amount.
And your family helped you with the down payment, given that this was within their range of what they said they would. Sweet. Okay. I want to move into transition in operations now, Lucas, unless there's anything more to say about. Okay, great. I guess you tell me where in your roller coaster of a ride for the last 3 years should we begin? Probably with what you found staff wise and kind of practices at the business.
So I wish I had asked for time cards, because if I had seen the time cards of the employees while I was going through diligence, I might have not bought the business because no one was showing up to work on time. And I'm talking, there were 5 or 6 manufacturing workers, and it was, and all of them were related to each other in some way. And none of them were showing up to work on time. And it wasn't like we started at 8 and they were getting there at 8:15. It was like we started at 8 and some people walked in at 8:15. Others came at 8:45. Someone's bike broke, so they showed up at 9:30 every day. And I have like a huge stack of orders to get out the door. So that was the first problem that I was immediately hit with. And I had 90 days with the owner to learn the business. And I'm realizing that his opinion about the workers not showing up is when they don't show up, I'll just get that work done and save a few dollars because they're not here, right? Because I'm not paying for their hourly wage. And when they're not here, I can get that work done much faster than they would when they are here. So it's all good. Right?
He would do it himself?
Yeah, he would just do it himself. And he was okay with that.
Yeah.
Because he
He's saving
he
money.
was saving
he
a few
saw
bucks,
it as saving him a few bucks. Yeah.
and he knew he could do it faster than they could.
Yeah.
And that's his mentality, and that's okay. It's not a mentality that will allow one to expand a business. But that's I learned that was the culture and that was the mentality, and I would need to address that first. And I was not, and so that was a huge problem in the business. In addition to feeling eager to get started on the projects of modernizing, even though it's now clear to me that it's naive to think that I could accomplish that in the first 30, 60, 90, even the first 6 months. So that was like the content of what I was dealing with every day when I was in the factory. But then I was also really struggling personally with the burden of this debt that I had taken on and the personal guarantee, and how poorly the operations of the company were relative to what my expectations were when I bought it. So it was, and that those two things combined made it harder for me to solve those problems in the company, because personally I was a mess. I was an anxious.
Say more about being a mess, because you gave me some details on the pre-call that the audience should hear.
I was an anxious wreck. I think I knew that I would need to get rid of all of these people.
Yeah.
And I had just bought a manufacturing company, and I didn't know how to do anything. And I only had 90 days with the seller. And I was going to need to get rid of all of them and learn what they're doing without even them being there. And that was a terrible position to be in.
What did Walker say?
Walker, a few days after I closed, I walked into the back of the warehouse and called Walker, nearly in tears.
Of Acquisition Lab, Buy Then Build. Yeah.
And he said, Lucas, you burned the boats. The only way out is through.
Tough love and Walker.
Yeah, big time tough love. But also, I'd rather that than like sugarcoating the truth, right?
Totally.
That's the truth.
Exactly.
And so I mean, personally, I was in a long-term relationship that ended at the time because I just had no time to devote to the relationship, and the person I was with then wasn't willing to do that. So that was tough, but also it was very clear why it happened, and I didn't have a lot of bandwidth to process it. And all I was doing was working. And I mean, in the actual business, how I handle it, I guess, so that's like the personal side of it.
Yeah. You say it now with a smile, but we should be clear how despairing you were, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was like losing sleep. It was waking up in the middle of the night and having a panic attack or two. I think at some point I decided that the level of anxiety that I had about the situation that the business was in was getting in the way of me solving the problem. And so I went on an SSRI for a couple of years to deal with, to kind of make sure that just basic, that the basis of just stress that I had could be dealt with, so that I could just focus on getting shit done. For lack of a better phrase. I was addressing that, and at the same time I was addressing the problems in the business. And the main problem was the lateness and the lack of just the lack of respect and showing up late every day from all the workers. I mean, one day somebody didn't show up and just texted me that he was hungover and would be in the next day. And so I within a few weeks, I had a team meeting with everybody where I said, look, the context before this is everyone was paid at a starting wage of $12 an hour, and a few people had gotten raises from there to maybe 13 or 14, right? And this is in 2021, and costs are rising. And so I said to everybody, look, I don't think anyone in 2021 should make less than $15 an hour. But I also don't think that employees of a business should be showing up late and, working significantly less than 40-hour weeks. So I'm putting a plan in place where if you show up on time and work 40-hour weeks for 4 weeks in a row, I will give you a raise such that you started at $15 an hour. So everyone would get essentially a $3 raise.
On $12, so that's a 25% raise.
Correct. Or if somebody was making 14, they'd be making 17.
Okay.
But it's a significant raise.
Right.
And of the 6 manufacturing workers, and also I didn't say, and if you don't, this isn't the right place for you. I didn't need to say that. I think that was pretty clear. Within a few weeks, 4 of the 6 manufacturing workers were gone because they wouldn't show up on time or work 40-hour weeks. I also asked everybody to get vaccinated, and a number of them said absolutely not. And we were all just butting heads, and I had to. And it wasn't like they were showing up on time, working 40-hour weeks, and were really core members of the business. They were clearly just. A lot of them had been there for a year and a half, and were trained but not super well trained. And I figured I'd rather replace this person than have to work with them for another few years.
What about the fact that the skill set of of being able to produce your product is walking out the door when they leave? How are you going to address that if they called your bluff and a lot of people left, which they did? Now, I don't know if they were calling your bluff, but they just decided it wasn't for them.
Yeah, so there were 2 people who I really wanted to retain, I didn't want to, but I needed to. All of the other ones were positions that I could fill fairly easily, like a sewing machine operator. There's a lot of sewing machine operators in the Newark, New Jersey area who have decades of experience in the garment world. And then the cutting machines, which were just cutting with hand scissors. Really, the knowledge there is knowing how to work with the patterns that are on that conveyor system. And so there was somebody named there who was been there for over 2 decades, who was the lead cutter. And then there was one sewing machine operator there who knew how to sew everything. And these were the 2 old timers, and they were earning well over $15 an hour, close to around $20 an hour or more. And I really needed to retain them. And they also started showing up on time and working 40-hour weeks. So I was able to retain them. Mm-hmm. Now, the cutting machine operator, when I say cutting machine at this point, I'm not talking about the CNC machine operator, was an alcoholic and would be drunk the majority of the day, I think. So much so that in the summer when it was very hot out, he would have seizures and we would have to call an ambulance.
Oh my God.
And yet he was the only one who knew all of the different patterns. So I knew I needed to keep him at least until I was able to get all of those patterns digitized into, CAD files that could then be cut on the CNC machines. And then the same thing with the sewing machine operator, but he was not an alcoholic. He was honestly a great worker. And we were happy to have him for a number of years.
Lucas, what do you think you learned from the fact that offering a significant raise to people to just kind of, baseline do the normal amount of hours a week didn't work? What did you learn about human nature, or maybe even kind of this end of the market, or I don't know how you want to characterize it or frame it?
I don't necessarily think the amount that somebody earns is correlated to their qualities as a human being in terms of being prompt to work and, responsible. Sometimes I've hired somebody at a, lower wage relative to the other folks in my factory in the last few years who's proven to be far more responsible, timely, and capable than anyone else. Yeah. And I've rewarded that person as a result. But maybe that incentive program that I offered, what I was trying to do was change these people, right? By saying, if I pay you $3 more an hour, can you change as a human being?
Yeah.
Right? Can you And either that or, would you have more respect for me in the business? Or would you care more about showing up to work for another $3 an hour? And the answer was no. I knew that these people would probably still not work out in the long term. But I was thinking very short term at this point of I have a stack of orders I need to fulfill. Demand is strong. Some of them are getting canceled because the turnaround time is so bad, so long. And so I either need to get these people to a point where they can just where we can get through this stack of orders, and then I can deal with them individually over time and figure out who to retain and who to let go. Or I need to figure out very quickly that none of them are going to work, so I can hire new people and I can have enough time with the prior owner for him to help train those people while he's also training me.
And so where does it shake out? You 4 of those people didn't even make the month.
I think 3 or so of them didn't make the month. It's tough. I don't have I can't tell you exactly how it played out because it was 4 years ago and it was just such a crazy time. But those 2 old timers who had a lot of knowledge stuck around for another 2 years. And during those 2 years, maybe 2 or 3 of the really bad eggs in the beginning were gone by August. I closed in the beginning of July. And then and everyone since the whole team has turned over since then.
Wow. How have you evolved as a manager? Are you harder now than you were before?
That's a good question. I've had to learn how to fire well. And I've had to learn how to trust my instinct when somebody isn't working out on the team. And then follow that instinct. I've learned that when I start thinking, is this person dead weight? Right? Is this person not the right fit? And I'm just thinking about that. That probably is the right time to talk to them, and either let them go or give them some feedback and put them on an improvement plan. And in the past, that was not. It was a much longer process to get to the point where mentally I was ready to part ways with somebody. And because of my level of comfort with that, what I just described, I'm actually less hard, I think. Because I want the people who work for me to just be who they are. And I don't want to micromanage them. I want them to, just be themselves. And we have core values in the company that we've put together. Work smart, be a team player, and sweat the small stuff. And if we are all embodying those values, then I don't need to be a hard manager at all. And if somebody is not a good fit for the team, I'm very comfortable parting ways with people now.
Great, Lucas. Let's turn our attention to how you ended up improving the business. So maybe the process, how you've modernized the business, maybe the process, maybe digitizing, not yet what you've done with e-commerce. That will be its own question.
Okay.
But anything else other than making it a D2C, adding on D2C?
So improving the company, I would say the first step was cloud ERP inventory system for managing the manufacturing and understanding our inventory levels and understanding the cost of each product that we're making. So we implemented a cloud ERP in the first year of ownership. And, we use Xero, which is a competitor to QuickBooks, and a new billing system, and we use ShipStation for shipping instead of WorldShip, and just all of those basic improvements, which were very step by step. Let's take this legacy system and replace it with something new. Okay, the next legacy system, let's replace it with something new. And then once all of that was done, we were able to offshore some of the tasks that were very expensive to complete in the office. I had an office manager who had been with the business for over 20 years and was earning a very, very healthy salary for what she was doing every day. And again, I knew I would either find that she could learn these new systems and, manage these new systems, or she wouldn't be able to. And it became clear to me that she wasn't able to, even after a lot of training. It was very hard for her to let go of the old way of doing things. So she would both be doing the new way, and she would continue to do the old way behind my back, which wasted a lot of time because we didn't need to do it anymore. And after a lot of different feedback sessions, and just it wasn't working anymore. And so I ended up replacing the office manager position with a number of different nearshore and offshore contractors that's been a huge cost savings for the business. And we've only been able to do that by implementing the cloud software systems.
What did those savings look like? What was she earning, and then what are your offshore, your nearshore
was earning
people?
Probably $75,000 to $80,000 a year after bonus. And currently I have a woman in Bolivia who is wonderful, is doing an excellent job, and she's paid very handsomely and has a second home, and she's set there, and I'm paying her around $2,000 a month.
So about a third.
$50,000 to $55,000 savings a year.
Yep.
Right. And so that was the software side. And then in the factory, the digitizing and the CNC machinery was the modernizing that took place in the factory.
How did you find the woman in Bolivia, Lucas?
I think it was Hire with Near, which I think do they advertise on Acquiring Minds?
No, that's Near is Michael Girdley's, I think.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah.
It was through his folks.
Great. Great. Okay. So back to so you modernized the factory floor with basically the implementation of a CNC machine, which a lot of the cutting now becomes programmable, done by a machine. That must have been an enormous savings. Of course, a CNC machine costs many thousands of dollars.
There's a lot of items that I've invested in over the last few years that will be that were required investments in order to scale the business from a capacity standpoint. Right? I could not have scaled this business from a throughput standpoint without this machinery. I could not have continued to, be tracing patterns on the back of carpet with chalk and cutting it with hand scissors and increase our volume with that. It just wouldn't have worked. It would have the amount of training of each employee that would have been required, the quality control, the consistency. So I needed to convert the patterns to digital files that could be pulled up on a computer and just cut on a CNC machine, which sounds very simple, but the software and the hardware to do the conversion is, $10,000, $20,000 of purchase. And then there's labor that needs to be actually doing the digitizing, right? Which is, call it another $50,000 a year position to be digitizing all of this stuff. And then there's another machine that needs to be purchased, which is probably another $50,000, right? And then there's been a second machine that needs to be purchased as our volume or our capacity needs to expand. It's another $30,000 because I got a really good deal on it. But I'm throwing all these numbers out because I bought a business with $300,000 in SDE, and after debt service, there's like $150K left over.
Exactly. I wanted to ask what you're paying yourself, and you just talked about basically $150,000 in investments. So what does that look like?
Yeah, I'm not really paying myself. Like, I haven't really been taking much of a salary out of the business. I will take some draws out distributions when I can. And this is not a realistic setup for somebody who has a family and a mortgage and
returning to our theme of your age.
Correct. Right. Like I kind of knew some of this going into it and was okay with that.
Yeah.
I wish I had bought a bigger business because I have needed additional help from my family to finance some of this growth. And so we went through this big J curve related to just modernizing the existing business. But then since then, there have been additional add-on acquisitions, and each one of those is another J curve. Both the capital to acquire that business and then to integrate to relocate a manufacturing company, in some cases across the country, and then integrate it into the existing platform business requires additional capital. And Newark Auto will be at the point where it can start financing those acquisitions on its own, but it hasn't been because it was still going through its own J curve.
Mm-hmm.
So this goes back to, in the beginning of the interview, I was saying, you were talking about how I was interested in fundamentally transforming a company,
mm-hmm.
and how that's different from other searchers who might be looking for an asset that's already performing really well, that's stable, that they don't need to transform, that they can operate and improve, but cash flow on day
mm-hmm.
one, or cash flow, after a year of building some reserves. And so that's not what I've done. And it's and part of the reason why I haven't done that was probably my startup background, right? Where my instinct was to expand and transform and pivot and all of that stuff. Like that's my entrepreneurial learning before this. And in a long-term sense, it's going to be an excellent outcome for me. I'm really transforming this business into something that is valuable. It is more valuable than it was when I bought it. But it's been very capital intensive in the process. And if I didn't have the support of my family, I would not be able to take advantage of the opportunities that I have taken advantage of. And I'd probably be a lot closer to where I was on day one.
So you mentioned the acquisitions. We're going to end with hearing about some of those. There's both interesting stories, but also some important themes in there. But before we do, let's hear what the results of e-commerceizing this business have been. Maybe some of the steps to get there, and then what it actually looks like from a numbers perspective.
There was a challenge. Just building a website, right? Like building a Shopify site from scratch and then improving it over time has been a very iterative process where we start with something that costs very little just to test out the thesis that, we can start generating sales from our website, and we've grown it from there. But a lot of people view building a website as a one-time project where you spend a bunch of cash, you work with an agency, and then it's done, right? And I haven't had any one project that's been like that. It's only been iterations over time. But I love that process, right? I really enjoy the process of saying, okay, let's improve these aspects of the site and then measure how our conversion rate is impacted by it and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you enjoy it, but it's also tremendously valuable. You're baking in a lot of value when you do that, optimizing your funnel. Yeah.
And you can't do that with one project. You can only do it with the feedback of time in between each of these iterations.
Yeah.
So the site has just been an iterative approach for years, but I'm at a point now where we're generating more sales from the website than we are from all of the dealer accounts.
So does that mean that you doubled the business? So you had just dealer accounts before. Now you have more direct e-commerce revenue. Does that mean you've doubled it, or have you lost some of the dealer revenue?
I want to make sure we touch on the pricing dilemma that I had also, but I'll answer that. So let's talk about that after. And the answer is, it's such a niche product set that if somebody's searching for that 1950 Packard carpet kit, right? And the only people who had that listed online were my dealers. And now I'm, in a sense, competing with my dealers online. So
there's a word for this, Lucas. I think it's like channel cannibalization. It's not that, but it's something like that, where you go into, anytime there's a business with a channel, where the channel is a big source of revenue, the channel partners, in your case, the dealers, actually always have to worry that their supplier, is eventually going to do an end run and compete with them, which is in fact what's happening. But
So
I
it's,
digress.
it's happening, but I've needed to be really careful about that, right? So
Yeah.
the business has grown from about $1.25 million a year in sales when I bought it, and we did just under $2 million in 2024.
Oh, fantastic. I didn't ask you for revenue. So it was $1.25 million.
Yes.
And now it's $2 million.
It's just under 2 million. We'll definitely break 2 million this year. I think we can do far more than that, which we'll talk about why later. And then we mentioned at the beginning of the call that rubber mats are a group of products that we've distributed for decades. And they're rubber mats for classic pickup trucks that are exactly like the original ones that were in these old Chevy C10s, which are a very popular car. And we distribute these mats to very large dealers across the U.S. And that line of business was sub $500,000 of sales, and I haven't focused on really expanding that, just because I don't manufacture those items, right? They're not, and so I do. A partner does, but I really want to focus on expanding the sales of the items that will fill up the capacity in my factory and make it much more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we've more than doubled carpet sales, right? We've more than doubled the sales of the items that we manufacture in-house, because if you remove that $500,000, call it, of rubber mat sales, beforehand we were doing $750,000.
Right.
Right. And now we're doing, call it, $1.5 million. So we've doubled the carpet sales.
Yep.
In those last few years. And the sales of items through our dealers has increased. And the sales of items through the website have increased. And the way that I've been able to do that has been with a pricing model where I tell all of my dealers that I have a manufacturer suggested retail price. I had to put together an MSRP for every single item that I sell based on not cost plus, but value-based pricing. So we did a whole value-based pricing assessment, and we analyzed, for the products where there are competitors, what are these products selling for? And we set our MSRPs based on that. And then I commit to only selling at MSRP. I will not sell below MSRP. And my dealers get a discount from MSRP that's fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Mm-hmm.
they want to undercut me, they can.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I've given them price protection in a way where they aren't saying, yeah, we're not going to work with Newark Auto anymore.
So if I want to buy carpeting for my 1982 Porsche 911, I can come directly to your website and get it for $200. What is the average order value? Just throw out a number.
$300 to $400 range, but that product category that you just mentioned might be a $1,500 product.
Okay. So $1,500, I can get it directly from you. Or if I go to one of your dealers, it will be priced also at $1,500, maybe even less. You've given them permission to undersell you, but you promise not to undersell them.
Correct. And I think the value that you get coming to me is I am a real specialist of these different fabrics, right? If you're just looking for a carpet and you want to work with the manufacturer of the item and work directly with us, and maybe there's some customization you want, or you want to really make sure which fabric and which backing and which binding and which vinyl, like all of that is being used, you come to me. But if you're looking for, parts for your engine and door seals and glass and carpeting, if you go to one of my dealers, you can buy all of that together from them, and that's not something that I offer.
Yeah.
So they're just two different value propositions.
Yeah. Well, and this also, Lucas, goes back to this incredible moat you have with your intellectual property. It sounds like you're really trying to do right by your dealers, but given your, I don't know I guess the degree to which you have competitors varies from vehicle to vehicle. So maybe there are other 911 carpeting business, vintage 911 carpeting businesses where the dealers can take their business. But some of your dealers are going to have no other option than to go to you anyway, right? You're probably the only provider of some carpets.
Correct.
At all. And so if they want to be able to offer that at all, they're going to have to accept your terms.
Exactly.
And then, so obviously building the website and iterating on the website and conversion optimization, et cetera. That whole digital marketing, or that whole piece of on-site optimization, has been a big part of this story. But so too has been the digital marketing. So what, did you hire an agency to do your Google and Instagram ads sort of thing?
So I will just say the biggest issue and the biggest challenge for me with the website has been the amount of vehicles that I offer products for, the amount of different fabrics that are available, and then data and making sure that all of that is databased properly, and then listing it to Shopify in a way that's efficient. I mean, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of lines of data.
Because it's every permutation, every model of every vintage car, across all the different fabrics.
Correct. And you think, you think it's just, 1970 Plymouth Cougar, right? But it's not. It's there's a different carpet for the 2-door hardtop and the 2-door convertible. Right? And so you have to literally database all of it. And for the much older vehicles in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, there's not easy databases that give you all the different permutations that existed. So it's research that we have to do to figure that out. And all our pattern says is 68 to 72 GM midsize, right? And then we have to figure out from 68 to 72 all of the different permutations of year, make, model, body style, and door number for the GM midsize, which is the A-body car, and then map our SKUs or patterns to each of those, and then generate it out in all of the different materials and colors, and list it all to the site in a way where you can go and put the year, make, model, and end up on the right product page, and it'd be simple for you. And that's just one pattern, and there's thousands of them.
Wow. Yeah, I'm overwhelmed, Lucas. I'm also just kind of salivating, because it's as painful and meticulous as all of this is. It's such a compelling moat. I mean, this is a data business masquerading as a manufacturing business.
Correct.
I like using that phrase. I don't actually think that's the case here, but there is so much value in your data.
There's a lot of value in the data, and so now we are making some investments in some AI tools this year to help with that management and the research.
Good. AI to the rescue. Okay, Lucas, great. Well, we're going to start wrapping up here, but the final chapter to our conversation is an important one, and it's all about how your bolt-on acquisitions that you've done since acquiring Newark Auto proper. Newark Auto? Is the name of the business?
Yeah.
One of my favorite themes of acquiring minds is the value of just being in the game, the value of having acquired a business. And if it goes well, of course, always with that giant caveat, the doors that can open, the opportunities that can present themselves once you find yourself in the seat. And I think it's fair to say that that's happened in your case, because now you're a player in this industry. You're probably one of the young buck, the young Turk who's making moves in this tiny little industry. And so you probably have the attention of your competitors. Take it from there, because we hit on this in the pre-call.
How I see it is, I have built this process in my factory to take these old school businesses that manufacture cut and sewn products for classic cars and turn them into, and take those patterns, put them through my process such that I can then list them on my website and with my dealers very efficiently, and in a way that resonates for the customers who are searching for them online, and also in a way that allows me to manufacture them in my facility in a much more consistent and efficient manner, right? With these CNC machines, the CNC cutters and everything. So once I had that system built, I realized I want as many patterns as I can get. And so I made that clear to a few of the dealers that I worked with, that, if they know of if there's any suppliers that they have that are looking to retire or sell, to please let me know. I did. And so, and from that was one acquisition opportunity that I found, which was one of my dealers told me they reached out to a company in Georgia that was a mom and pop shop in a garage manufacturing headliners, which is the fabric on the ceiling of the interior of the car, for all of the classic American cars that I make carpet kits for.
Mm.
And this sounded wonderful because it's it's an upsell opportunity, and it's a really good fit for my catalog. And so I flew down there, and I reached and so what my dealer who had reached out to this manufacturer, the manufacturer said, "Sorry, we won't sell you product because we don't want more business. We're older, we're wanting to retire. If you want to buy the business, you can do that." So he called me and said, "Hey,
Perfect.
Lucas, go check out these guys." And I met with them, and it was a website that was doing $150,000 a year in sales. And I was able to acquire it for, I think, 50 grand. And I have patterns now to make headliners for hundreds of the cars that I make, carpets for. And that was literally just all cash deal. I got their website, I got the patterns, I got the supplier relationships, a few B2B customers, but very few of them. And I'm still in the process, really. Like all of that whole business has been digitized and is now being manufactured in my facility, and it's a really nice way to fill up the floor when things are slow, or those headliner orders that we're getting in. There is seasonality in the business, so there are slow periods. That being said, I haven't yet taken advantage of really growing that line of business, because at the same time as that deal, I found another one in Oregon that a friend of mine, my parents' friend who has a lot of old Porsches, asked me if I made anything for Porsches. And I realized, wow, this would be an amazing market to serve, right? Porsche owners are really enthusiastic about their cars, and there's a cult following to that. So I went on eBay and I looked for other suppliers of Porsche items, and I found this guy who, his eBay listings were horrible. Like terrible photos, product photos, misspellings in the descriptions, but he had the best reviews, amazing reviews about his product quality. And so I reached out to him and asked if he would ever be interested in selling his business. It was clear he was doing the same thing, himself cutting and sewing fabric and shipping out these custom parts for, air-cooled 911s, 944s, that sort of thing. And he said yes. And so I got on a plane and flew out to Oregon. And I made a huge mistake when I got to the Hertz rental counter, and I had one of those credit cards that gets you, the ability to take whatever car. And I had a 4-hour drive through the Oregon countryside, and I took the convertible Mustang. Well, I arrived at this guy's business, his home, which was a trailer home, and this fancy convertible Mustang. And on the phone, he had told me he would sell me everything for 30 grand. And 2 days later, he told me he wanted $320,000.
Oh my gosh. Just because you're driving a fancy car.
I think it was probably because I was driving a fancy car. And I was like, oh my God, what an error. So it didn't happen for another year or so. But eventually we settled on a price, which was around the same as the price for the headliner business. I think he was doing more like 100 grand a year in sales.
Wait, so it started at 30, it went to 320, and it came back down to about 50?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, good negotiating.
Well, and that's the thing about these deals is, these are craftspeople doing this work in their garage. These are not businesses.
Right.
There's nobody else who can buy these.
Sure.
Other than my competitors, and most of my competitors are also owned by older folks who are eventually looking to retire. So I knew I just kind of let him sweat it out for a year.
Yeah.
And then I went and put all the patterns in a U-Haul box, and they picked it up and brought it back to my facility. And we've really expanded the Porsche business. I mean, that is the single make that we sell the most items of. And a few months ago, the primary competitor to that Porsche business that I tucked in went out of business due to a health issue. And I haven't been able to acquire his company. And I don't know if I will even want to, because all of his customers are coming to me now. And that could be, a within a year from now, that can be, $1 million of revenue just from serving this Porsche community, at least.
Wow.
So it's the value of being in the game, right? Is you're in the game, and you're in an industry like mine, and you tuck in this deal, and then all of a sudden things start breaking your way. Like, your competitor goes out of business, and all those customers come to you. So that's we're in the process of that right now.
Well, and there's also something to be said there. I don't know exactly how to put it, but the nature of your business, where you overhauled your own manufacturing system, made it scalable, and so these bolt-ons really they're completely seamless. I mean, it's almost like a digital business or something where you just plug in more of these patterns that you acquire, and there's no additional overhead even. I mean, it all is just IP that you can monetize with no additional cost.
And it's
I don't know what the learning is there, but it's a very powerful model.
And then the last, one other part that's wonderful is a lot of times it's a negative cash conversion cycle for these sales, because somebody orders the item, is willing to wait a few weeks for it, and I then order the fabric. Especially for the specialized European cars, I order the fabric from a specialized supplier who deals in this fabric, and then I receive it and ship it, and I've already been paid for the sale. So that's a wonderful dynamic in the business too. And you're right, it's just a matter of having more part numbers in this, system that we have in the factory, and listing more products on the site. It doesn't require more overhead, except I want to really expand this year. And so I've hired a salesperson, and I've hired somebody to really be in charge of the digitizing process. Mm-hmm. But that's just, growing up. The last deal was in November. I was in California for a trip. My girlfriend was giving a talk somewhere, and I met with my fabric supplier for European items, the one who I was just telling you when I have a special order for something for $1,500 Porsche carpet kit. This supplier of mine sources the fabric from Europe that's exactly like what was originally in the car. So I was meeting with him, and he said that one of his customers had recently closed in a very messy way, and owed him a lot of money, and owed a lot of people a lot of money. And so, but this business that closed manufactured seats, headliners, door panels, carpets, interior trim parts like dashes and that sort of stuff for classic Mercedes, Porsche, BMW, Rolls-Royce, Jaguar, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Bentley, all the really high-end European cars. And I would love to get into that market. And so, when I learned about this opportunity, the business was totally shuttered. The landlord had locked out the tenant. And I essentially was through lean searches online and sleuthing, just general sleuthing, was able to get in touch with the landlord and get a tour of the building, and saw all the machinery there, but all the patterns that I was interested were no longer in the building. They were in, and so then I went and I knocked on the front door of the owner's home, because I couldn't get in touch with him in another way, and I really wanted these patterns, and he eventually led me.
It sounds like he's somebody that doesn't want to be found as well.
Yeah, it's definitely that, because I'll explain that dynamic, but he led me to a storage facility, a few miles away, like a self-storage facility where all the patterns were located. And I was eventually able to work out a deal with him where I was able to acquire the patterns to make everything. And then because I was in touch with the landlord asked me to ask the seller if he would forfeit all of the items in the building to the landlord, so the landlord could clear out the building. And so he did, and then the landlord was willing to let us take the things in the building that we wanted.
You're kidding. A CNC machine?
There were no CNC machines, but there was other machinery that was valuable to me, and useful to manufacture these items. Mm-hmm. And then my fabric supplier was also able to be made whole by So I could have just taken everything in the building, including all the fabric that was owed to my supplier, but I brought my supplier in and he cleared out all of the fabric to try to make himself whole because he had a big AR balance with this company. So
Wild.
So, it was a wild deal. This business had taken payment for orders from many customers and never fulfilled it, and then just shut down. And so I'm not sure exactly what happened, but we're in the process of spinning it back up now that all of the IP and such are at my facility in New Jersey. I only bought assets, right? To be like, I didn't buy anything. I didn't buy the whole company. I just bought the select assets that I needed. And we're now trying to figure out how to spin this thing back up and make good with the customers who have all submitted chargebacks or are still waiting for their items 6 months later and they don't know what happened. But
because you think there's brand value to this business?
Well, it's going to take a very long time for us to get to put this business through our process. It's going to take a year or two probably to get all of the patterns digitized and cataloged and on our site. And in the meantime, they have a website that was fully functional. They were doing over $1 million a year in sales.
This was a legit business. This was not the garage door situation.
Yeah, no, this was a very legit business. Yeah. And so they were doing over $1 million a year in sales. It was about the size that Newark was when I bought it. I was able to buy these assets for the price of a used car, and then paid a few times that to get them moved from 3 18-wheelers moving manufacturing equipment from California to New Jersey, and now I've hired a few additional people to help with the process of selling, digitizing, listing. So I'm back in that J curve again, right? Yeah. Which is the theme of this conversation is all of these opportunities I've taken advantage of put me back in a J curve and have made it such that it will take longer for me to take home a meaningful salary from the company, but that's okay. I'm thinking in a long-term way.
Yeah.
And I think so there's a lot of interesting stuff to figure out. The deal just happened in December and we're talking in January. So we're still kind of in the middle of it.
So the way I characterized it before, where you take these patterns that you buy from, where you effectively buy the assets of a business and just plug them in, that was actually an oversimplification. There is cost in integrating those patterns into your business, which is mostly the digitization of them.
Yeah, the fixed cost base of the business goes up if I hire a dedicated resource to just be digitizing all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
A year ago, I didn't know that I would constantly have a backlog of patterns that need to be digitized, and probably will if I continue to do these add-on acquisitions.
Yeah.
And so at this point, I've decided to add that, overhead to increase my fixed cost base of the business to then digitize the stuff because I think it'll be worthwhile.
Yeah.
But now that I have that addition, I don't think it will get to a point where I need 2 people to do that. And so at some point it's kind of somewhere in between.
Yeah. Yeah. There was an additional overhead cost, but that overhead cost is now sunk and it's just going to stay there. So you can layer on more acquisitions you have the capacity for more acquisitions without additional cost.
Correct.
Yeah. On the digitizing the patterns piece, at least. So last question for you, Lucas. Is there a buyer for this business? Are there obvious buyers for this business? Because when you think about all this data and this intellectual property that you're accumulating, that becomes really enticing if there's a buyer who will want it, because you're doing. But if there is no buyer for this business, maybe it's less valuable. It's valuable to you as a moat for your business for the duration of the business's life. But you could see there being an even a giant premium paid for it if there's a buyer who wants this business for some reason.
Yeah, that makes sense. As I said on the pre-call, I don't think a lot about selling the business or like what I want to do with the business in the future, because I'm so focused on what I need to do now to get to a point where I have that option, right? It doesn't matter what I want to do in a few years from now when I get to that point at all. All that matters is I do the things now that will get me there, and then I can think about that then. And any time I spend thinking about that in a number of years is taking me away from what I need to do next to get there. So I try to spend very little time. And I don't think that I would build the business differently over the next few years if I want to exit in a few years, or if I want to just, continue to own the business. So, I haven't thought about this a ton. And I think for other searchers out there who are thinking, I'll buy something and exit in a few years, at some point, the exit thing goes on the side and it's just all about actual operations and growth in the moment. I don't think it's ever that simple, but the answer is, yeah. I mean, there's a number of buyers. There's a large group, a private equity company that owns a group of manufacturing companies like mine, competitors to me that are all owned by private equity. And there's a few different private equity players who have rolled up businesses like mine. So there's a few different groups that maybe one day I would explore being a part of. And then there's also a few independent larger companies that have product lines that are not exactly the same as mine, where mine would be really complementary to what they do, where they might be interested.
Yeah.
And then but there's also, I mean, I think that there will be interest as I grow my business in being acquired, because as I will start to compete more and more with the other manufacturers, which are owned by private equity. And I imagine those private equity companies will assume it would be better to just not have this other competitor on the market. So our moat is even deeper and our pricing power is even stronger. So they can build like a monopoly, right, in this market. But I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about that.
Well, and it's just so much of it comes down to how scarce this intellectual property is. If there's 10 players who have it, it's far less out there that have it. It's far less interesting than if there's two, you and somebody else, and that somebody else wants to be the lone owner of the intellectual property and have a true monopoly. Be an amazing position to be in. Very interesting business, Lucas. Very interesting story. Really a fun interview. If people want to get in touch with you with questions either about your business, people can ask you about the lab, right? Acquisition lab?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you prefer they reach out?
My email is Lucas, Lucas, at newarkauto.com. That's the easiest.
Okay.
If you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, you can do that too. I'm not really on Twitter or Instagram or any of that stuff, because I'm trying to put all of my energy into my business, and I'm finding those things to be distracting to me.
Attaboy. That's what you should be doing.
If you email me, that's the best way for me to get back to you.
Super.
And if you're a searcher or considering search and you reach out to me, I just ask that you come with specific questions and not just a general, I'm thinking about doing this thing. What do you think?
Yeah, fair enough. That reminds me of a public service announcement I go in and out of making, but I'll make it here because you've teed it up. That anybody who does want to reach out to Lucas, I'm now talking to you, listener. He's kind of already said it. Treat his time as the very precious resource that it is. He's very busy. Not just an open-ended, what do you think of my plan, but something very, very specific, and have done your homework. That goes for Lucas and all guests, that they're really busy people. And so if they get on the phone with you, you should really treat their time with respect. So thank you for saying that, Lucas. And thank you for coming on Acquiring Minds.
Thank you for having me, Will. This is exciting.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. Make sure you subscribe to the Acquiring Minds channel below. We are now publishing twice a week, so tons of new interviews and stories to come. Stories that will help you along your own path to acquiring a business.